This segment is brought to you in part by the Canadian Historical Arms Society, owners of the Genesee Range, the premier recreational sport and training facility in Western Canada. See us online at historical-arms.com.
The Quiet Professional, a podcast about law enforcement, security, justice, and politics. We are digging deeper on the issues and going where the information takes us, with access to experts and authorities. Welcome to The Quiet Professional. Hey everyone, welcome back to The Quiet Professional. Today, we've got some very big topics to discuss. So thankfully, I've got my co-host, John Simpson, on the show. If you don't know him, I'll give you a little background. He is a veteran of the U.S. Army and joined their special forces in 1978, became a sniper instructor in 1985. John then retired from the Army in 1994. He's an instructor with Snipercraft Incorporated and a research historian. John has also authored several books on the fundamentals and advanced tactics of marksmanship and sniper skills. Now, onto the topics. We are going to be talking about leadership in a world of censorship, responding to criticism, and ultimately finding your spine, which leads nicely into the intro for our guest. I have Dr. Chase Spears here. He is a writer, public intellectual, and host of the Finding Your Spine podcast at the Herzog Foundation. He is a combat veteran and former U.S. Army public affairs officer. He served 20 years, including a tour in Afghanistan and assignments with elite airborne and communications units before leaving the military as a major to advocate more freely on issues of culture and national defense. His work has appeared in The American Mind, Real Clear Defense, and The Washington Post, and he has provided commentary to several national media outlets. And now the doctor lives in Kansas with his wife and their 5 children. So great to have you here. Welcome, Dr. Spears.
Yeah, well, and please feel free to call me Chase, man. I'm not hung up on titles. I was glad to do that degree, but it is not my primary identity. So, I'm a father of 5, a husband to my college sweetheart, a man who tries, despite how fallen I am, to follow the Lord well, and be a committed Christian, and a veteran. I served for 20 years, as you mentioned, doing communication work my entire time in the military. And that's really unusual in the Army. Usually, as an officer, you start off in another career branch. But I came in the Army specifically to do communication work because I wanted to be in journalism. That was everything that I dreamed about. I grew up back in the days of Rush Limbaugh, AM radio being the big thing. I joked that I was bottle-fed CNN as a kid. So I took in information from every direction that I could. I loved information. I loved news. I believed, and I still believe, in some ways, in the righteous power of those who wield information to try to help inform people in free society, so that they can make the best decisions possible when it comes to their participation in civics. That's easy to be jaded on that in these days, but I kind of still hold to the basic principles of when there are people out there doing this job well, that it's a net benefit to the nation. And so that's what I wanted to do. And I ended up going into the Army as a public affairs soldier for a few different reasons, but one of which was because it would allow me to work very closely with news reporters. And I loved the idea of being able to partner with them from inside an institution that is not always known for being as forthright as it should be. And I thought, what a great mission. I intended to do one 4-year tour. And whenever I make a plan, as I often say, God laughs. And he had a hearty chuckle at that one. And so what I planned is a single 4-year tour turned into a 20-year career, because along the way, I had some really good leaders who believed in me and encouraged me and kind of propped me up and picked me back up when I wanted to quit, and reminded me that there was still a way that I could play an important part in the mission. And so we continued soldiering on. But in 2020, it became pretty clear to me that the institution is going in a direction that was just too far beyond where my values and my beliefs were for me to be able to remain in good faith as a public apologist, as a public communicator, as a public face for it. And so we began the process of preparing to transition out, and we concluded in late 2023. And since then, I've been an independent scholar, writer, thinker. I do a lot of writing on civil military affairs, a lot of scholarship on military institutionalism. My doctoral research was all about the political realities of the military as an institution in American public life. And I've been really blessed to do the Finding Your Spine podcast with the amazing Herzog Foundation. And that show is all about courage. It's about how do we encourage people to put their conviction into practice and to stop hiding behind the curtains and to come out and live truth and to bring truth back into the civil sphere to make truth popular again. And so that's what my mission is right now. There are some good days, there are some hard days, but my wife and I were
Mhm.
committed, and we believe that this is the path the Lord has us on.
Well, and I just want to jump back a little bit just so people can really get to know you. You say that, some of the stuff didn't align with kind of your mission, your values, different aspects there. What exactly are those? Like, what were you seeing and where was this kind of coming from?
Well, in any institutional context, there's always going to be some level of challenge because institutions are run by human beings and human beings are fallen, and we have a way of grinding on each other's nerves and in some ways departing from what others might believe is the right thing to do. And that even happens even in church contexts and Christian university contexts. And so
Hmm.
that's a function of institutions. The military, one of the things that I loved about it was even the things that I disagreed with, in general, it was still a ship going in a general direction that I absolutely believed in: defending America, protecting the Constitution, teaching young men how to be great men, building up leadership, the warrior ethos, the warrior mentality, things that are so valuable and so essential for the continuation of ordered liberty. But then in 2020, that was the biggest break that I saw. And there were little breaks along the way because it really kind of
Okay.
for me started in 2017. The Army had sent me on a fellowship to Georgetown University, and I had a couple of really great instructors who could see in me a passion for writing. And they really kind of helped to pull that out of me. And I began writing for a publication and had some pretty quick success. Actually, my first ever public piece ended up going viral and getting picked up on Drudge Report back when Drudge Report was a thing to pay attention to. Got quite a bit of attention. And that put me in a place of friction with the military institution. I actually got called physically into the Pentagon over that. And I began to see that my writing was beginning to separate me from the pack, that I could see they didn't see me as much of a member of the team anymore as that guy, and I got labeled. And so that was the first indicator of maybe doing 30 years, because that's what my wife had planned on once I got past 15. Was I love soldiering, I'm good at my job, I hit my promotions on time, I get good report cards, I work well with people, I love what I do. And so we'll just go ahead and do 30 years. Why not make it a life calling? And that was my first indicator in 2017, 2018, that I don't know if they're going to still have a place for me, because I'm a thinker, I am a little bit of an intellectual, and they frown on that. And how that's a friction. How far can we go? 2020 was the next big thing. And that all comes down to the word COVID and the way
Yeah.
the military was so draconian. And I'm going to foot stomp the snot out of this. It was draconian the way this shot mandate was put into place. Now people can have disagreements about vaccination policies and efficacies and this and that. What we know, though, is at the end of the day, the shot did not live up to its promises that it would heal everything and fix everything. And anyone who had any critical thinking ability from the very beginning knew that would end up to be, at least to some level, the case. And the military has all sorts of shot regimens, and I never questioned them.
Mhm.
I got lined up every year to be the pincushion. Never thought anything about it. I believe in medicine. We've seen great strides in what medical technology does to enable quality of life. So, but by no means am I the dreaded anti-vaxxer. That's this completely made up term that people use just as an insult. But I began to have questions because I thought, well, have you ever seen an ad? I don't know what it's like in Canada. I'll tell you down here in the US, every time we see a pharmaceutical ad, like three
Mhm.
quarters of the ad time is usually taken up with running through all the side effects and all the risks,
Yeah.
and every one of them up to death.
Yeah. 90% of our media is American anyways. So we get all the same stuff.
Yeah, I figured as much, and so all of a sudden I'm seeing, oh wow, they've developed this one thing that has no side effects, and it didn't go through any of the usual testing, and they cut all the red tape, and it's amazing. It's a miracle drug, and I thought, well, there is no such thing as a miracle drug, but it's one thing to question whether it was wise for the military to require this thing, and I say it was not only unwise, it was reckless. But I understand people of good conscience can say, well, the military has required vaccinations over the course of history, and assuming, let's make an assumption that this thing would have been safe, maybe it would have been good policy. I would argue against that. But here's the point. The point is, it was a draconian way that it was enforced, that if you
Hmm.
had a question about this, no longer was it you're a good soldier who has a question. Now it was, you are a traitor in the ranks. You have violated your oath. You are no longer trustworthy. People were who had given years of their lives, who had
Hmm.
sacrificed, who had deployed, many of them multiple times in harm's way, who had missed years of their children growing up, missed years at home in the arms of their spouse, and did it voluntarily because they believed in the mission, they love the nation, they don't ask anything in return. They do it because they're patriots. They do it because this is their life's calling. And the way that they were cast out into the darkness and treated as if they were traitors. That was the next breaking point for me, was seeing, if this institution will turn on good people, how can I publicly represent it? How can I go out and
Okay.
tell the public, this is a good place, this is a trustworthy place, this is a place that will have your best interest at heart, when I'm watching people who I trust on my right and on my left being cast into the outer darkness? And I faced a significant amount of persecution as well. Now, I ended up taking the shot at the time incorrectly, believing it to be a lawful order. But even for just questioning and talking to my boss about it, the way that he talked down to me like I was an absolute imbecile, I'll never forget it. And so that was
Hmm.
the second of three things that really made me realize this isn't my home. And I'll pause there in case y'all have any thoughts on any of that, or any experience from your end.
Yeah, and then, John, if you want to jump in at any point, feel free. One thing I wanted to kind of mention was like, so you're talking about you started doing some writing and speaking out on certain things even before COVID came along. So you're saying 2017, 2018.
Yep.
Did you, and I mean, you're a ways into your career at this point. So people know you, you have relationships, and they know you as a certain type of person. Like you said, you're doing fine career wise, and you're hitting all your goals or all the targets. So once you start writing, like, what did people come to you and say anything such as, hey, I see you're taking a very strong stance on this, or you're thinking this way. Like, what's the deal? Did something change, or did people just kind of cut you off, and then it's just led further down a certain path that way?
It was really kind of a two-faced thing, and it was based on, I wrote a lot of stuff, but there were two pieces I wrote in particular that really shaped how people began to change the way they treated me, and I began to feel like there's a difference in the room when I walk into it. The first one was, this was 2017 or 2018. I wrote a piece for the Baltimore Sun. It was titled "A Soldier's Perspective on Bergdahl," and Bergdahl being Bo Bergdahl, the American POW from Afghanistan. And I took the Obama administration to task for how they handled that situation, but I also took the Army to task for how they handled the situation, because as we all now know, he abandoned his post and he was eventually court-martialed for that. But up until that Rose Garden ceremony that President Obama had, hailing him as a returned hero, up to that point, that the story that the Army allowed to get out was that he had just fallen behind on a patrol. Now, the Army knew the truth.
Mm.
Soldiers I served with knew the truth. I was eventually briefed under conditions of absolute secrecy because I was the unit spokesman of the truth. But we were all told you can't talk about it because essentially this is the line. And then when he came
Okay.
back, a lot of the soldiers broke their silence and they said, "We're not going to let this guy be seen as some hero who just fell behind on a patrol. He walked away from his base." And ultimately, they shamed the Army into doing the right thing and holding a court martial. So my first piece was written on that. And I'll never forget being pulled into the Pentagon and being told, "Look, this isn't what a public affairs officer is expected to do. You can't do that. You signed up to not have an opinion when you signed up to have a PAO. You signed up to not speak into things that are of public debate when you signed up to be a PAO." Essentially, the message to me was, when you signed up, you signed away your citizenship. You signed up to check your brain
Yeah.
at the door.
Did you expect that though? Like, did you expect once I'm going to write this paper and maybe I'm going to get fired? Like, what did you foresee maybe coming out of that and kind of taking a stand?
At the time, admittedly, I was somewhat naive. I'd never had a publication hit that level before. Back in my college years, I'd done a couple letters to the editor for a very, very, very small newspaper that was in a very small town. I didn't really expect this thing to grow legs. I didn't realize at the time, not only was Baltimore Sun going to run it, but it would get picked up by Drudge, and then the AP would add it to the Newswire, and then other places would pick it up, and it would kind of become a viral thing. That was beyond me. I thought this will be the far back end of the opinion pages on one day, and it'll be lining bird cages the next. And I'll just say, "Hey, look, cool! I got in a bigger newspaper." So, admittedly, I was a little bit naive and didn't realize, wow, this topic. I'd lived this topic for years. To me, it wasn't novel, but it turns
Yeah.
out to the public, it was novel and it was new information that they did not know, coming from someone who had a personal connection to that unit, coming from someone who had been a spokesman for that unit. All things that, again, I was just swimming in for years. I didn't think anything special of them. It was just I had some thoughts. I wanted to share them. These instructors helped me to figure out how do you package this in a way that might be of interest to an editor. And I did not expect at all it was going to make the splash it did. And so I'll never forget the day it ran. I was out in my front yard playing frisbee with my sons, and when we came in for dinner, I look at my email and it's just blowing up. And I'm like, "What the heck
Yeah.
is going on?" And how, people give me attaboys. "Loved your article. Loved your article. Your article stinks. You're a traitor." A mix of stuff. But one guy said, "Hey, I saw your piece on Drudge," and that was when I realized, "Oh crap, I've
Uh-oh.
gone viral." Right? Because if back then, Drudge was kind of the main news aggregator here in the United States. And so I didn't expect people to pay that much attention to it. In hindsight, it's obvious to me with experience and being able to see how the public looks at some of these topics. Now it's obvious to me. I should have seen it coming, but at the time I didn't. And so I I didn't at all expect then secondarily for people in uniform to say, "You can't do this." Now, I'll never forget after the colonel finished with me, I got invited into a closed door meeting with a colonel at the Pentagon, and this guy is still serving it. I can't believe he's still going. But anyways, he dressed me down the best he could, but he's not very good at it. And I just kind of looked at him and said, "Sir, whatever you guys decide you're going to do to me, I'll take it like a man." And I don't think he saw that coming, and it just kinda threw him off, and he didn't know what else to say at that point in time. And so, he dismissed me, and I walked out into the office, the cubicle farm there in the office of the Chief of Public Affairs section, and, another major there who knew me, who had served with me in Alaska before, is like, "Hey, Chase, you can't do that." And I said, "Hey, sir, I violated no rules. Everything that I did is in
Hmm.
accordance with the regulation. I'm still a citizen." He said, "No, no, you I get all that, but you're an officer. You can't do that." And that was the very beginning of me realizing, man, they're the rules, the policy, the written things that guide us, what we can and can't do, and then there are the norms. And the gulf between them is wide enough you can drive a battleship through. And that moment actually, it was frustrating in that moment of time. But I look back and I'm very grateful for it because it was the first moment that got me to thinking about these things, which turned into my PhD dissertation about the difference between norms and policy. And I say the norms
Mm.
are much stronger. The norms are the actual soft policy that gets things done because ultimately at the end of the day, culture eats policy for breakfast.
A lot of what you're saying kind of resonates with me, just even having started the podcast. Like, I'm a currently serving police officer. And when I first started this up, I was definitely scared of, like, opinions and things of my peers. And that's one kind of camp I was worried about. But then it was like, what are the higher ups going to say, the chief and deputy chiefs, and what might they think about this, right? Like, even if you don't say something necessarily bad about them, they might just not like your opinion.
Mhm.
And then it's like, okay, well, what are they going to do? Because as police officers, we're subject to criminal stuff, we're subject to civil liability, but we also have a third act called the Police Act, and that's your discreditable conduct. That's like your catch-all sections where it's like, well, you didn't do anything criminal, and I can't sue you civilly. This is just the I don't like what you did
Yeah.
charge. And, so you kind of got to balance this real fine line. Funny enough, like, as I was going along and building a lot of these relationships and talking with people, I actually found more support than I thought I would get from the chain of command. And a lot of the things we do talk about on this show, it's stuff that they necessarily can't say or get into, because it gets real political and stuff, and try to keep some of that out of policing as much as possible. But, you know, but the things you're saying, like, really do resonate with me, because when you want to speak out on something and maybe it's challenging an idea from the higher ups, and some of them don't like that. But I find the more I've done it and the more people I've had conversations with, because it's opened a lot of doors, I've actually found it's just helped with conversations now. And more of those supervisors and the chain of command have been more willing to talk about things now. It's just like, it's such an interesting dynamic. I don't know if you necessarily had the same experience in your time, but a little overlap is all I'm kind of saying with what my experience has been. So,
It sounds like your experience has been much more supportive than what I found in the Army. And
yeah,
some of that may also come down to the difference between being a practitioner. In law enforcement, you're hands-on. You're actually the man who's enforcing the law. And I wasn't in the infantry. I wasn't the guy, who's there helping to close the gap. I was the spokesman. And I think there are a lot of guys in the Army, mostly in the Army, some in other services, but this is mostly in the Army, who have influencer status, and they're held to a little bit different kind of customs and norms than someone who's a spokesman. The Army's public affairs branch is notoriously anti-intellectual, anti-thinking, anti-expressing anything that isn't on behalf of the institution. And that was told to me nearly verbatim. And it's a fallacy. And I answered it this way of, if everything that I say is always on the record, because that's what I was told when I began writing and some of my stuff began getting attention. I was pulled aside more than once and told, look, as a spokesman, you're always on record for the institution. That's just the way it is. You can use the disclaimers and you can say all the stuff about, this is my personal opinion. You can be in civilian clothes. You can be on leave. None of that matters, because we know you're a spokesman and reporters know you're a spokesman. And so everything is always on the record for the institution. And I thought how absurd that is. And I answered it with, does that mean I could never teach a Sunday school class at my church, because that would be construed as the position of the Army? Does that mean if
yeah,
as I kiss my wife on the way in the door and say, I love you, sweetheart, that I have to then tell her, but I assure you that's not on behalf of the Chief of Staff of the Army? And it sounds absurd for me to say that, but you have to answer absurdity sometimes with absurdity to make the point.
yeah. police deal with a similar thing where it's like there's always a debate of whether you're on duty, off duty, right? Like if I go and do something off duty, well, again, you could still get done with discreditable conduct. Even if you didn't go around waving your badge and saying, I'm a cop, and, but it's like, but you still represent the police even when you're off duty.
Mhm.
Well, I don't carry my gun. I don't get to carry my gun when I'm off duty. I don't go and, take calls when I'm off duty. So, like, at what point do I get to just be this guy and live my life, and I have those beliefs or whatever it might be. The one thing I did want to ask about is just as a person, did you always have this kind of in you? Is this something you developed over time, or did you have certain leadership or books you looked to and then maybe it developed from there? Like, how did you become this person that you are that is then sticking up for, your beliefs and taking a stand?
Was absolutely something that developed over time. I've always been a thinker. I've always been someone who is very, very, firm in my beliefs. I'm very morally driven, and I use morally driven as a very different term than ethically driven, because morality has to be grounded in something. And
Mhm.
but I'd never felt confident to make these arguments in public. I didn't feel like my voice is all that impressive. I still don't feel like my voice is all that impressive, but it's what I have, and it turns out that in some ways it's pretty useful. But it was a couple of people that I met while I was at that fellowship at Georgetown from 2017 to 2018, and I credit my time there with being a big turning point in my life, beginning to realize, right, this passion that I have within me, I actually can translate it in a way that is of interest to other people. Now, the courage or stubbornness or whatever you want to call it for standing up when I write something and then the hounds of hell come for me, and how in the world I was able to look at that colonel and say, whatever you deal out to me, I'll take it like a man. It just kind of came to me in that moment. And up until that point in time, I was not naturally the kind of guy who would do something like that. I really did kind of want to get along with people, but there was just something, and I don't know what it was, but there's just something that was kind of an inflection moment of me realizing this is a talent that I have, and it's a net good for the army if they turn me loose within the force to use this to benefit the career field. But they are spending an obscene amount of taxpayer money to send me to this elite school to develop these skills and to practice and hone these skills, and yet they're telling me don't use them. And I saw the rank hypocrisy of saying that. All right, well, why would you want me to go develop these skills if you don't want me to use them for the benefit of the institution, and you don't want me to return unto the taxpayer any value on them sending me to the
Yeah.
school? And I think in that moment it's just kind of an anger and realizing I'm not the same person that I thought I was, and I'm going to begin standing up. And by standing up, I don't mean that I went and picked fights with people. I didn't seek to become a viral personality. I didn't seek to become an influencer. I just felt like these are legitimate questions to ask. These are legitimate arguments to make. If they tell me I'm supposed to be a professional in the profession of arms, well, part of being a professional is trying to enhance the craft. And if they're telling me we want none of that, that's not who I'm content to be. I'm not content to be a bureaucrat who merely shows up, clocks in, does whatever they want me to do for 8 hours, clocks out, takes a check on behalf of the taxpayer, rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat. That's not
Yeah,
who
I
I'm going
can't
to
stand
be.
that.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? I want to make sure we get into a few of the topics, things that you do write about, things that you talk about on the podcast. John, do you want to? Maybe we'll jump into some of the topics you had because I know the doctor's going to have a bit of stuff to say on some
Yeah.
of these. So let's get it started.
First I would, my 2 cents on what I think led to your epiphany was, I think you came to that moment of decision where you basically, does a PAO have a commitment to facts, or does it have a commitment to advancing the cause of the Army? And because I can't help but think of, a lot. I mean, everybody makes fun of, countries and governments and everything that engage in propaganda. But you look at some of the fairly recent events of the U.S. Army, and it can only be classified as propaganda. The two that immediately come to mind are the Pat Tillman case and the Jessica Lynch case.
Yeah.
Okay, where those were like flat out lies, and basically it's one of these things where somebody would justify that with, hey, go on to get along makes us all look good, right? I mean, the image of Jessica Lynch, the commando, fighting off the Iraqis to the last bullet and all of that stuff. The main thing I wanted to add, so one of the things I wanted to ask, because when we were talking earlier before the podcast started, I said I was really grateful to Nathan for bringing you here, because during my career I dealt with PAOs on a intermittent basis, and to finally have a PAO that speaks the truth and knows where the bodies are buried is a rare opportunity for me. And so the two things I wanted to ask about is all of the puffery about with the inclusion of female soldiers into combat arms, specifically infantry combat arms. Okay, because it's like, hey, I haven't seen I haven't seen too many helicopter pilots that were built like Arnold Schwarzenegger and everything, and more power to it. And when this first developed, I was already retired from the Army, and but I was telling some friends of mine that I said, you know what, they're doing this. They're promising this party line that hey, as long as the women can meet the standards, they can do the job. And I said, you mark my words, the first time that you get a significant number of women that can't meet those standards, some female senator is going to be calling in generals, asking them, why do you have those standards? And then the standards are going to be changed. And so I wanted to ask about the the women who graduated from Ranger School, and then the the changes in the Army combat fitness test, because it originally had an event called the leg tuck, and it turns out that women had a very difficult time passing that event, and the Rand Corporation was brought in 2022, telling to basically provide a report that the leg tuck doesn't really test anything, and it was replaced by the plank, which was a completely different test. And there was you just indulge me for a minute. There was a paper that people can look up. It's called Justified Concerns and Exploration of the Leg Tuck in a Tactical Population, in the International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health in 2022. And it just says, the current study provided some data that may question whether the plank is the best substitute for the leg tuck in the ACFT, and whether its inclusion may divert from identifying those that need of further upper body conditioning. This is because soldiers lacking in upper body pulling strength and muscular endurance may still be able to perform the plank, even though the ACFT may have shifted towards a more general fitness assessment. If results from this test are used to drive a soldier's training, this could be an issue as training staff may not receive a full picture of an individual's strengths and limitations. Indeed, if a soldier is lacking in upper body pulling and pushing strength, this could disadvantage them in tasks such as climbing ropes, scaling obstacles, and hand-to-hand combat. And now this was a paper based off of a population of firefighters, male and female, and doing the leg tuck exercise. So bear that in mind. This was firefighters, not soldiers. And so to summarize, 6 out of 274 males, or 2.2% of the sample, could not do a pull-up, while one male, 0.4% of the sample, could not do a leg tuck. For the females, 6 out of 31, or 19.4% of the sample, could not do a pull-up or leg tuck. This also meant that 25 females, or 80.6% of the sample, could perform at least one pull-up or leg tuck. And in soldiers, the performance of, or the inability of the typical female soldier to perform the leg tuck led to a whole bunch of changes where the scoring was changed and the event was thrown out and everything else. So I would just appreciate your thoughts on the matter.
What a mess. I'm going to jump straight to the fitness test. If we have time, happy to come back to the Women in Ranger School and combat arms. And before I forget, I'm going to show this book on the screen. This was written about it, Stand Down, a book by James Hassan. And he does a masterful job in chapter 4 of really chronicling that whole issue. And there's another book over there on my shelf. If we have enough time, I'll run over and grab it and show. We'll see if we come back to the topic of public affairs as propagandists, because yes, that's a very real issue. An issue I pointed to, an issue that I wrote about, and was labeled problematic for doing so. But I'll try to focus now on the fitness test, because if I put those three together, I'd talk for the next 90 minutes without a breath.
Well, it's a good excuse to have you back.
That'd be great. I'd love it. I'd love it. Absolutely. The physical fitness test. This one, it's in this book right here. It's a very academic book titled "Internal Communication and Employee Engagement: A Case Study Approach." Me and Dr. Mark Eliadent co-wrote a chapter in here. Where is it? It's chapter 3, Leading Institutional Change Through Digital Communication, a case study on the launch of the U.S. Army Combat Fitness Test. And what started my journey on that was 2018. I was coming to Fort Leavenworth to be a student at the Army's Command and General Staff College. Oh. Now, a few years before, I had a bad parachute landing. I was a paratrooper. I had a bad parachute landing that dislocated my left shoulder, and I was a young lieutenant, and I was stubborn, and I was stupid, and I didn't listen to my physical therapist, and I didn't do all the stuff I was supposed to do to take care of it, because I was a platoon leader, and I had troops, and I didn't want to look like a weakling in front of my troops. Everything they did, I was determined to do and do harder. And John, I'm sure as a veteran, you understand that. No lieutenant wants to look weak in front of his platoon. And after 4 dislocations, when I couldn't even confidently pick up my baby girl and hold her on my shoulder because I didn't know if my shoulder would hold, I decided that's not a way to live. Had it surgically rebuilt. It's strong. It's fine. I lift and do it. I'll do sorts of stuff today. But if you watch me do a push-up, I don't do a perfect push-up because the joint isn't a natural joint anymore. I still do a full push-up, but it looks a little bit funny. And because of that, I technically can't do an Army push-up because I don't break a perfect, even, flat plane. And so they exempted me from the push-up because in order to try to make a flat plane, I was hurting myself further. And one day, a wise NCO watched me hurting myself, and he's like, "Stop hurting yourself, sir. You're not proving anything anymore. You're like, we'll get the paperwork, and you don't do that." Well, I'd share that story because in 2018, when the Army Combat under the old test, it was called the Army Physical Fitness Test, APFT. 3 events: 2 minutes of push-ups, 2 minutes of sit-ups, 2-mile run, It was that test was implemented, I want to say 1980 or early 1980s. It replaced a more complex.
I was there. Yeah, I was in when it changed.
Okay, it replaced a more, what I'm told was a bit more complex test. And the idea was that on an APFT, all you needed was a measured 2-mile run route, and that's literally the only equipment you needed for a test. You don't need any other gear for it. You can do push-ups anywhere, you can do sit-ups anywhere, as long as you have a flat March 2-mile running course. That's all you need, and you can get a flat March 2-mile running course just about anywhere that there's, that you have a cleared field. And so the test was going from that to the Army Combat Fitness Test, which was a 6-event test, which was highly CrossFit influenced, and it required a lot of equipment. In addition to a 2-mile running loop, and so it was very, very logistically a heavy test. And the Army's talking points were that this test, you either did all of it or you did none of it. That there would be no exemptions to any of the events going further. You were either able to do every event or you couldn't do any of them. And if you couldn't do any of them, you weren't qualified to be a soldier and you're going to be kicked out of the Army. Well, this is 2018. I've just made major. I'm coming to the Army's Command and General Staff College. And on one hand, in my classroom, I'm being told, you're now a committed member of the profession of arms. Commit to it. You're going to be here for the long term. Become the leader. And on the other hand, Army messaging is telling me we're going to throw your butt out because you can't do a push-up. So my question was, which is it? Do I get deep into the books on military tactics and commit to the Command and General Staff College, or do I start papering Kansas City with my resume? Tell me which direction to go, guys. And so I ended up writing this chapter with Mark because the Army kept butchering the communication of it. And John, you're absolutely right. As they began testing this test, what they found was the women were having difficulty with what was called the leg tuck. And the leg tuck is basically you grab a bar and you do about a half of a pull-up. And while doing that half of a pull-up, you rotate your knees up into your abdomen. It was the easiest event on the test for me. I do pull-ups as part of my regular fitness regimen. And you only had to do one. That's the thing. You only...
Yeah, and it also tested for what's known as functional fitness. Okay, because
exactly.
The thing is, it's like, the problem I had with the 3-event, the 3-event PT test that Chase was referring, that replaced a 5-event PT test that was like primarily functional fitness. I mean, we had the horizontal ladder, we had a run, dodge, and jump. I mean, it was a lot of stuff that you did in combat. And then we had budget cuts, everything else. And they were like, well, we got to give them some PT tests. So, they came up with the 3-event PT test, which I wasn't a fan of. And then the Marines came up with a functional fitness test. And basically people were going, you know what? This 3-event PT test, it's really not testing anything that people need. And the best example that I give is that for years and years and years, push-ups, sit-ups, and 2-mile run. And maximum score of 300. And then Iraq and Afghanistan started. And then you had, a couple of Spec 4s that like come up to my shoulder that score 300 on the PT test. And the platoon sergeant comes by with a pallet of ammo and says, okay, you guys hand those shells up to the guy in the turret so he can load them into the tank. Okay, you got, a half hour to do it. And, somebody that scored 300 on the 3-event PT test can't press a shell overhead. So that's why we were looking at functional fitness. And then the ACFT came along and politics and everything else. So.
And you're absolutely right, John. The APFT was not a good indicator of actual fitness. You could I passed that thing for most of my career, and looking back, I was not in good shape. I'm in the best shape of my life now because I do functional fitness, and I love what I do now. I was not in shape to pass the APFT, but I passed just fine and I scored very well on it. So I supported the idea of a test that was more functionally focused. I had some issues with how logistically intense it was. And I had some issues with them saying, "Hey, no matter what, even if you've been in for years, if there's one single event you can't do, we're going to kick you out to pasture." I don't think that's the right answer for it. There's still a lot of things that senior officer. We don't expect generals to be out there throwing shells. Now we want them to be fit, right? But they're paid for their brains. So let's be honest about it, and senior officers as well. But the issue was, as you rightly noted, women were having issues with the leg tuck. And all of a sudden, every talking point about how, hey, this is functional fitness. If you can't do this, you can't do your soldier task. Man, all of a sudden that went out the window because the Army was not about to have women filling this thing by the thousands. And why were women having trouble with the leg tuck? It's not because women are defective. It's because God made us differently, and men have different levels of strength at different points of the body. The leg tuck was the easiest event for me. And so it would be easy for me to be like, how can someone not pass a leg tuck? But my daughters are not built with the same upper body construction that I have, right? That it's tougher for them. Same with my wife. It just is biology. We are created to do unique things. I cannot give birth to a child. Thank God I don't want to deal with that, right? We're all built with strengths in different areas. And this gets back to what was being pushed under the Biden regime, under the Obama regime, was this whole thing of everything's equal, full DEI, and what that means, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Diversity meaning, well, we want the force to be diverse, and that means getting women into combat arms. Equity means equality of outcomes, no matter what your capability is, and that played straight into it as well. And of course, inclusion, which is just a repetition of diversity. And it was all about the move to push women into combat arms, was all about how do we make the force, as Ash Carter and Barack Obama like to say, look like America, versus how do we make the force as powerful and as strong and as indefensible as possible, right? And that's what you need an army to do. An army is not for everyone, just like the guys who build skyscrapers. That job is not for everyone. The people who climb through sewer pipes, that job is not for everyone. There are some things that humanity requires for good order of society, that these jobs aren't meant for everyone. And soldiering on the frontline combat arms is one of those jobs. And the Army Combat Fitness Test was supposed to be a discriminator for that. But as you rightly note, John, all of a sudden we had congressional hearings about the Army Combat Fitness Test. Why? Because there were women were having trouble with the leg tuck. And lo and behold, all of a sudden they magically determined that a plank can measure the exact same physical attributes and stress the exact same muscles as doing a leg tuck, which again, I'll remind you, is a half of a pull-up, just rotating your knees to your abdomen while doing it, not even a full pull-up. And I do pull-ups, I do planks. These are part of my regular regimen. I do them without even thinking about it. They're some of my easiest exercises. And I can tell you, they work entirely different parts of my body. And so you could see the narrative house of cards just falling completely apart about how this test was going to determine what you could and couldn't do in combat. And this test was going to ensure, it was also supposed to ensure that women could be in combat arms. That was another way this test was designed, was that this will be gender neutral scoring. The APFT, the old test, where you had different grading scales based on whether you were a man or a woman. The new test was supposed to be gender neutral. And the idea behind that was this will prove to the world women belong in combat arms, because women will pass this test just like the men. They designed it to be combat effective, but also they designed it thinking this will not be a difficult test for women to pass. And it turned out to be a test that was difficult for women to pass. And so they went through, I stopped counting after 5, because they were 5 iterations into this test by the time I retired.
Wow.
5 iterations, different changes. Now, I liked the Army Combat Fitness Test. I took it 3 times before I got out. I thought it was fun. It was way funner for me than the old APFT. It was kind of like a team event. You'd cheer each other on, and you're getting to kind of throw stuff, and I liked it. I thought it was kind of a neat event.
If I could jump in on that though,
Yeah.
like, and when you're talking about like all these different versions, where's the leadership to kind of push back or say like, no, this actually won't make a difference, or it does make a difference, or just again, kind of going back to the whole finding your spine idea, like why were there so many versions of this thing? Why was someone not just calling it out then? It's just lack of leadership, or the leadership we needed.
Yeah, I think you had two things at play there. I think first is you have to understand that at the senior levels of the U.S. military, and from my talks with Canadian vets, I think that you guys have the same thing north of the border as well. I think even worse up there. But the senior ranks are men and women who are complete careerists. We don't have a Patton or an Eisenhower or a Marshall in today's army. We have careerists whose every decision is calculated based on how does this one keep me from out of any risk of getting a headline I don't want, two, keep me from having my butt drugged before Congress, and three, help me to continue on in my career. Even since I've got out, I've had a couple of
Yeah.
generals reach out to me privately and say things like, "Hey, I appreciate what you do. Keep up the fight." And I'm like, it would carry a hell of a lot more weight if you would join in.
Yeah, then step up.
Yeah.
Right?
And
Like then join.
and they're like, "Oh, but I can't." I'm like, I've kind of gone direct with a couple of them and said, "That's the problem. You guys leave it to guys like me. You guys have nothing to lose. You'll at worst you'll retire as generals, and you'll still get really wonderful 6 or 7 figure jobs afterwards on top of your high 6-figure retirements.
Mhm.
You're going to be fine. You have very little to lose. You leave it to the field grades, guys like me, who quite literally have a lot more to lose by percentage than what you do. But they have been so enculturated in that it's all about me, it's all about my career, it's all about my brand. And so that's one thing you had going on there is whether it was the fitness test, whether it was COVID, whether it was pushing back against this insane agenda that somehow transing in the military was going to make it stronger. These guys don't push back against anything, because they're just about self-preservation. The second thing I think was the reality was beginning to hit them in the face that they came out rah rah rah, this test is going to be great, and you see that that's a part of military culture today, that every new program, the messaging immediately comes out, we found a new system, we found a new process, we found a new tool, a new widget, a new helicopter, and this will fix everything. It's kind of an almost messianic claim, like a faith-based claim, like you're going to a new church.
Same in policing.
Yeah, and this will fix it all. But then reality begins to creep in once they get this thing out of the laboratory and start testing it on the field, and you find out, oh, hang on, it's complicated. Oh, hang on, it costs a lot of money. Oh, hang on, it turns out it's hard to train people on. Oh, hang on, the women can't pass it. And what do they do about that? Because it challenges their narrative. And so, all right, well, then they just go back and change it and say, we found a better way. Well, your initial announcement said this was the best way possible, and it was scientifically proven. So what is it?
I think if they came out at the beginning and just had a little more humility, came out
Yes.
with a little bit more of a humble message and said, we've identified some area we need to fix or a gap in a system or whatever, and examining all options, this we think is kind of something we want to try right now.
Mhm.
But to sell it as this is going to be great and everyone's going to love it, like you're setting yourself up for failure with any of that kind of messaging.
Oh, absolutely. These silly faith-based claims. And so they now have decided in the last year to entirely scrap the Army Combat Fitness Test. And now they have what's called the Army Fitness Test, which is now a 5-event test that does not include a leg tuck, but does include a plank. And it looks eerily similar. I'm pulling up on my browser right now. Yeah, funny enough, it's basically the Army Combat Fitness Test, just taken down to 5 events. Now they call it the Army Fitness Test.
Interesting. They removed the word combat.
Yeah.
Like there's something.
Well, yeah, they gave up on the whole functional fitness thing, and what disappoints me the most is, see, Nathan knows this, but in the police sniper community, I actually co-authored a functional fitness test for police snipers. And the thing is, it's like it's age and gender neutral scoring, because one of the principles of functional fitness is that the saying in special forces was the rucksack doesn't get lighter just because you're older.
Mm-hmm.
And so the thing is, it's like, from my previous example, you got a cannon shell on the ground and you have to move it from there to the guy standing on top of the tank. Well, it doesn't get lighter because you're a female or you're a 40-year-old man.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the principle of functional fitness that they had to scrap with the Army PT test, because it was like, well, because PT scores are part of the, are used in the promotion process, which is another big problem. Basically it's like it's unfair to the female soldiers because they're scoring lower on a gender neutral test. So they introduced age and gender scoring back into the test.
Well, and now the Army fitness test, I was looking at it just right before we started recording because, again, I've been out 2.5 years, water under the bridge. I kind of stopped paying attention when I retired. But this new test is gender neutral again. And I think that's driven by Secretary Hegseth, if I recall correctly. I think he made a statement about that last year, that we're going to have gender neutral tests again. And I expect, give it a few years and the Army will switch it up again. And it's a shame that the Army is being forced to do the right thing on this, right? They shouldn't let politics dictate how do we physically test people. That should be something that the Army is an expert in. No organization in the world should be more expert at what it takes to be an effective soldier and how to physically and mentally test for that than the Army. And yet we see the Army is seemingly incapable of doing that without having to have heavy supervision over it. And they could have pushed back early on with the Army combat fitness test when women were failing and said, yeah, this stinks. I guess we're not going to have women in combat arms if they can't throw a shell. And I'm sorry. Yeah, I know there are a lot of women who might say, well, that's unfair. You know what? Life is an unfair proposition. War is an unfair proposition. The enemy gets a vote. You need to have people who are physically capable at the echelon to which you assign them. Now, I've served with some great female soldiers over the years. Some of the soldiers who I trusted the most in my career were women, but they weren't frontline combat infantry. They worked in admin, they worked in other specialties where their analytical skills were absolutely essential and absolutely added to the mission. But that's an entirely different thing from saying, well, men and women are completely the same and we can interchange them on any job at all. That's not the point of a military. The point of a military is not to show you're a diversity score or to get on an index like that somewhere. The point of a military, just like the point of law enforcement, is to have the right people who can responsibly wield strength and power in order to accomplish legitimate, righteous state policy, if need be, under the force of arms.
I think that's a good place to wrap it there. So we'd get to about an hour, and man, we flew through that. There's so much more we got to talk about, but I do want to give you the opportunity here, Chase, just to say, some of the current projects you might have going on. Obviously, we've mentioned the podcast a few times, but anything else that's kind of coming up, continued writing, what might you have going on?
Yeah, well, thanks so much, Nathan. I would encourage people, if you'd like to know more and follow my work, I catalog all of my writings at chasespears.com. I'm also on most social channels, whether it be LinkedIn, X, YouTube, Substack, at Dr. Chase Spears, Dr. Chase Spears. So that's a way people can follow. And of course, the Finding Your Spine podcast is a big project that I'm working on right now, which I just absolutely love. And that's available on any podcast listening service. And it's also on YouTube. If you Google me, you might find a few other chiropractors in the mix. That's kind of a funny thing when you're looking it up. So if you have trouble finding it on Google, you can always also just go to my website, chasespears.com, and there's a link to it right there. Big things I'm working on right now is I'm continuing to do a lot of writing about the role of veterans in society. 2 years out now, I'm starting to understand why so many veterans end up going into federal service. And I used to question why, because I thought we've got such a diverse array of talents that I think would just be a wonderful way to contribute outside in civil life. But I'm finding the civ-mil divide continues even when you get out as a veteran, and there's that misunderstanding about what value you bring. It still holds true even when you take the uniform off, so I'm going to be doing some additional research into that. What is the historic linkage between societies and looking down on veterans, because we saw that in both world wars. I think the more that I read history, I see that that's kind of a feature of life, not a bug of it. And I'm seeing that even in our generation as well. So I'm continuing down that line of research as well, because even though I do a lot of commentary and podcast work, I've still got a little bit of a scholar's heart and try to contribute in the scholarly realm as well.
Yeah, that sounds very noble. And you know what? I really do appreciate the work. And if I can help share this, feel free to reach out. I will put links to the website, and so people can go check it out. It'll be in the episode description for this. And as always, John, thank you for co-hosting. And people can find his books. You want to mention your books there? Because I'll also have them in the episode description.
Sure. Currently, the two books I have published by Blue 360 Media. They're also available on Amazon as Foundations of Sniper Marksmanship and Foundations of Patrol Rifle Marksmanship, both written for the law enforcement perspective. And from my own company, I have my first book, Sniper's Notebook, which is written for both military and police snipers, and is only available through me. You're going to be required to provide either law enforcement or military credentials in order to purchase that. So those are the three I have in print right now.
Awesome stuff. Okay, hang on the line, you two. We'll say bye offline. But thank you for being here today.
Good to be with you. Thanks so much, Nathan.
Thanks a lot.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for listening in and following along with the discussions. Be sure to click the follow or subscribe button on your respective listening platform. Also, check out the Quiet Professional on X and Instagram under TQP780. And most importantly, please share where you can. Everyone has a part to play in getting these education and information pieces out there, so pass it along. Thanks again.